Today we're talking about that time back in the 70s where Chevy almost made a mid-engine sports car that had a Porsche chassis, had a body designed by Pininfarina, and it almost became a Corvette. So earlier today I was listening to the Hooptycast, which features friend of Shifting Lanes, Elliot Alvis. I highly suggest you go check them out. And they were talking about the Wankel rotary engine. And we all know rotary engine from its fame powering Mazdas of various different assortments, but it really took off when it powered the RX-7. However, today we're not talking about Yanny Mazdas, but we are talking about General Motors, specifically Chevrolet. And while the weaknesses of apex seals was kind of already known at this point in history, everybody, and I do mean everybody, figured that they could find a solution and that the rotary engine was, well, the engine of the future. Enter the special vehicles department over at Chevrolet, and they took one look at the rotary and thought, yeah, that'll do great in a sports car like our Corvette. And not only were they thinking about putting a rotary engine inside of a Corvette, which on the face of it is insane enough, and no, before you ask, none of them were Rob Don's grandfather. They were also thinking about taking that rotary engine and putting it in the middle of the car. However, the engineers at Corvette had one kind of sort of tiny problem. They didn't really have any mid-engine cars on which to base the new vehicle on, nor did they really want to go through the effort of engineering their own new bespoke chassis. So the engineers over at Chevrolet took a look at the Porsche 914 and thought, that'll work. However, we don't really like the styling of it, so why don't we redo that? And by redo that, I meant they called up Pininfarina. Yeah, the same guys who have been designing some of the most beautiful Ferraris and Italian cars ever made. So on the face of it, Porsche chassis, beautiful Pininfarina body, this thing is off to a great start, even if it's rotary powered. However, this was still America, and the most American thing we can do to, well, any engine, especially back then, was to take a look at it and then make it bigger. So this wasn't going to be the dinky little rotary that Mazda was messing around with that made like 50 to 60 horsepower. This was going to be a 206 cubic inch two-rotor rotary engine that made almost 200 naturally aspirated horsepower. Now I know what you're thinking, that's not a lot. Just remember, this was the 70s. 200 horsepower, or in this case 180 horsepower, was still quite a bit of power, especially in a chassis as light as this car was going to have. And the plan for this car, well, was going to be a two-seat sports car that sat somewhere underneath the normal, regular, full-fledged Corvette. And before you start thinking that the Corvette in question that this thing was going to sit below was going to be the normal, full-fledged Corvette as God intended with a big V8 up front? No, the bigger cousin to this was probably the more well-known Aerovette that had a massive four-rotor engine. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what side of the aisle you sit on this particular car, the gas crisis hit. And, well, rotaries are many things, but fuel efficient is not one of them.